Hey, thank you for a great question. The current scholarly consensus is that the book of Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic literature first began to be composed and compiled in the latter half of the 7th century BCE under the reign of King Josiah. And the origins of this consensus are to be found in questions that were being asked way back in the Renaissance and the Reformation by humanist scholars and reformers who were challenging traditional authorship, not of Deuteronomy, but of Joshua and Judges and Samuel and Kings. So we have like John Calvin, who says that Joshua probably didn't write Joshua. It was probably this priest named Eleazar, because he refers to Joshua in the third person throughout and even narrates his death. And then a few decades later, we have a Catholic scholar who notes that there are these statements peppered all around this literature about how this place or this artifact is still there to this day, which indicates that the person is not writing contemporaneous with the events they're narrating, but many, many years later. And so this scholar suggests that it's probably Ezra, way down in the Persian period, who is compiling all of these stories together. And then we have Spinoza, who says, Deuteronomy looks an awful lot like it's setting the stage for and pointing in the direction of the events that are being narrated all the way through to the end of the book of Kings. So suggests that Deuteronomy and this other literature is part of one whole corpus that is to be distinguished from the first 4 books of the Pentateuch, which became known as the Tetratuch. And then you have in the early 19th century this Swiss scholar named De Wet, who says, hey, it seems an awful lot like this book of the law that Josiah found in the temple conveniently in 2 Kings 22. Might be Deuteronomy, and this just might be a story of how this book that they created was actually what they were supposed to be following all along, because the reforms that are implemented don't really relate to the rest of the Tetratuch. And so Josiah became the main kind of context for the original development of the book of Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic literature. And scholars since then have been imposing new methodological lenses and asking new questions and challenging this consensus in a lot of different ways. And a lot of the details of this theory have ebbed and flowed and changed, regarding who these redactors were, how many redactors were there, when this half of this verse is to be dated versus this half of this other verse. But the main core idea that the book of Deuteronomy began to be compiled under the reign of Josiah has not really been significantly challenged. It is agreed upon by the majority of scholars. In fact, since the 20th century, I would argue it's been significantly strengthened. We have a number of scholars who have pointed out the vassal treaty of Esarhaddon, which dates to just a few decades before the reign of Josiah, happens to match the kind of treaty nature of the book of Deuteronomy in not just content, but even in the order that content is listed. And so a lot of people think that Josiah used this vassal treaty of Esarhaddon and other Assyrian literature as kind of a template for how to have Adonai strike this covenant, this vassal treaty with the people of Judah. And so there are, again, minutiae details that change from time to time and differ from scholar to scholar, but the overwhelming majority of scholars would agree that the earliest layers of the book of Deuteronomy were first brought together, and the Deuteronomistic literature first began to be compiled under the reign of Josiah in the second half of the 7th century BCE. And if you would like more discussion, I would highly recommend Thomas Romer's book, The So-Called Deuteronomistic History. There are a number of different books that talk about this from a scholarly perspective, and this book is going to be a little technical, but I think it's probably the most accessible of those that are out there and probably does the best job covering the development of the theory as well as the methodological grounding for it.